So we recently put out this blog post, how do I prioritize features? This is the part one. We're going to be releasing the part two pretty soon here, but this is on our website in the blog area. So definitely check that out. This first one goes into more of the customer feedback side of prioritizing features, how you take that data from research and customer discovery and some other parts of the organization. We'll get into that in a little bit into this presentation as well. But that's what this first part's all about. Part two that we'll be releasing soon is going to touch on constraints and how those factor into prioritizing features. So let's dive in. Prioritization. So when it comes to prioritization, I have not been in an environment where there's not enough choices. There are usually many different opportunities, and there's a lot of vision for the product and different things that can be built, and a lot of good things that can be built. So the problem is more so, what do you do with all of these different choices, all these different possibilities? And of course, you can't do it all at once. So three main constraints that you have are your people. Do you have enough designers? Do you have enough developers to actually build everything? Time. That could be looking at your cash flow and what your runway is currently looking at. And it could be a time to market, speed to market type thing where you need to get something where you can start selling, and of course money. So there's the cost, the budget that you have to work with, which is of course directly correlated to what kind of time and who you can hire, things like that. So we have to make choices. Of course, as a UX designer, I'm a little biased towards customer feedback being a primary source of how you actually start to prioritize features. This is Ben Chestnut, founder at MailChimp here in Atlanta. And he says people want what's best for them, and they can switch on a dime because there's always a new disruptor disrupting the last disruptor. So companies should just strive to keep changing and adapting to their customers' needs. So I really love this because it's really just about focusing on our customers, what they need. How we understand what customers' needs are comes through, of course, research and other sources of data. So the big picture, this is really kind of how we want to view everything through the lens that we want to see things through. What is ultimately the goal that customers are trying to achieve by using your product, either downloading it or logging in today or purchasing it if it's a subscription package or things like that. So a few ways that we can find that out. Customer discovery, that's really focused on your product market fit. I would differentiate that from UX research in that your UX research is going to be a little bit more focused on how you should design something based on people's behaviors and their current tools that they're using and their expectations, more on the details of the experience. Something that a lot of people don't really maybe think about first off when they're thinking about customers, learning about the feedback and what should be built is really relying on other teams that are internal to the organization. So customer success teams are talking all the time to customers, so they get a really good feel of what's working for customers and what hindrances there are to customers adopting a product and being able to use it to meet their goals. Support teams, of course, there's going to be support tickets coming in. There's going to be trends that people are noticing over time coming in from customers, and of course your sales team. So they're going to be talking to prospective customers and seeing people looking for particular feature sets and things like that. Now, there are a couple things to be aware of and maybe a little cautious of when it comes to using internal sources of data. So there's the danger of a recency bias. So in other words, something has come up a lot in conversation recently that might feel like the most important thing, but may not necessarily be what gives the most long-term value to customers. So that is something to definitely be aware of. And then, the other thing is when you're hearing directly from customers, especially in a sales process, you might hear things like, "Oh, I would buy this if it had this, this, this." Well, it's very speculative, so you don't know for sure whether or not that's actually the case. When it comes to somebody actually taking out their credit card, whether or not that would actually be a main motivator for making a purchase, and how much they would actually spend on it. Would they actually buy the product? Well, it's speculative, and 5 months from now, that whole situation might change, push comes to shove. So behavioral data is super important when it comes to looking at customer feedback. So this is basically looking at what people have already done or are saying that they've already done, because that's a little bit more trustworthy in terms of, if somebody has done something, then they are more likely to do that again. There's a certain amount of habit or really kind of proof to the pudding of what somebody is willing to do or what somebody's really looking for or motivated by. So usage data can be super informative in terms of what kind of features somebody's using, what they're not using. So that could help in terms of what to get rid of and also what to add, what to supplement, what to enhance or redesign. And of course, lost sales and churn. If you see that you are missing customers because of a specific feature, they're going to somebody else who has that feature, that is actual transaction that is taking place, an effort on the customer's part that is backing their sentiment and the feedback that they're giving you. So some things to ask yourself as you're prioritizing features. First off, does this help users achieve their goals? We kind of talked about that a little bit with that big picture, but does not having this particular feature that I'm thinking about, does that actually prevent the users from achieving their goal? That might actually be a strong driver in saying, we need to really focus on this next feature, because without it, people can't do what they're trying to do. What gets us to product market fit? So thinking about the table stakes features, so to speak. If you're in a sales conversation, or if a user is comparing one app versus another, which are they going to choose? And a lot of times they're looking for specific features that one might have over another that will help them to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. So what are those things that you can't even really have a conversation with a prospective customer about because you don't have that particular feature? Those might be things to focus on. Now, dependencies is another thing. So you look at the value of a particular feature, you might say this is going to be a really awesome feature, but there might be something that needs to come before that particular feature to make sure that that particular feature will be able to be built. So it might be something that needs to be done on the back end or to the data structure to support this new feature. It might be something with the experience that needs to change in order to support this new feature. So thinking through those things could actually help order some things that might feel less important or feel less valuable before the things that are really super valuable. Cost and timeline, you definitely want to factor in how long and how much it's going to cost to build something. This might not be the primary thing because you really want to think in terms of value to the customer, but at the same time, if you are going to take a couple of years to build something, you might want to build some other things first, or at least cut the current feature that you're thinking about into smaller pieces. Will it break anything? Now, a lot of times you'll have this feature idea where it'll actually require some things to change, or it'll break patterns that people are used to when they're using the product. So definitely important to think about what it's going to break. And it could be on the back end, could be with the experience, could be several different things. Maybe you're introducing a third-party tool that won't really match the experience that, or a library that you can't customize to the point that you need to in order to have a consistent experience across the board. So those are all things to think about. Where does our product stand now? Now, one of the things that we do for several customers is we do design audits so that basically we can rank usability issues on a 1 to 5 scale. We pinpoint them, and those higher usability issues, those things that are really significant blockers or hindrances to users achieving their goals, those will be a much higher priority. And those are things that can be taken care of first. Then looking at what's essential, what's not essential. If you're looking at this feature, you're thinking of it as this large package. Are there some things that can be cut from that and put into future releases? And then really that core essence of it is going to be your first release, is going to be your MVP. It's still enabling the users to achieve their goals. Maybe it's leaving out some more edge cases where you're not going to have to build the whole thing, and at least you can get something to market. So then your customers can start giving you feedback. They'll start using it. You'll start hearing from your support team, your CS team, your sales team, and you'll have a much better idea of what should come next. And then, of course, what opportunities do you miss? Now, a lot of times you're thinking of, oh, this feature is super important, this feature is super important, this feature is super important, but you really have to kind of put them up against each other in combat, kind of one goes in or two go in, only one come out, where you really only have that kind of choice. You have to make a choice, one or the other. So which wins in terms of value, which wins in terms of cost, which wins in terms of the larger product vision for the long term, that can really help. So next steps, one of the things that we like to do, obviously research is super important. It kind of comes throughout the whole process. So you have your early stage research where you're doing conversations with users, interviews, you're doing analysis on other tools that are out there, things like that. But the usability testing, as you're actually designing and prototyping something, can be very, very informative as well of what should stay, what should go. And you actually get some feedback similar to what you would get in a user interview that way. Designing is actually important to do before you get into a lot of prioritization. Now, there's going to have to be some level of prioritization before you get into design, but in order to really estimate accurately, you need to have some sort of a design, whether it's a wireframe and some interactions that you're planning out. You need to have something where at least where the dev team can start to say, okay, this is going to go to that, that's going to go to this, we're going to need to use this library to be able to do this particular functionality or interaction. It's going to be able to make that timeline a lot more accurate. Whereas if you're just giving an idea, there's so many different variables and so many different possibilities of where that design could go that you can't really give it's just whoever's best guess is a crapshoot. But once you have those estimates, once you have the designs in place, you can start to version things out and break things into those smaller pieces where now all of a sudden you can say this part can go kind of be a standalone for this first release. And we can start getting that customer feedback. We can start, and then we can move some of these other pieces of this feature to the next version or the next release. So let's go ahead and open up to questions and talk through anything that you have in terms of prioritization.
I can kick us off with a question. So what questions do you need to ask to be able to accurately estimate timelines and requirements for developing a specific feature?
Yeah, so there's questions that kind of like what we went through related to what you should be asking yourself, but then you also have questions that you should be asking your customers. So we did a blog post recently, or I wrote a blog post recently that we have on our blog related to asking good questions of your customers. So definitely encourage y'all to check that one out.
Cool. I was going to ask. I'm interested to kind of hear. This is for a lot of companies. This is really nitty gritty stuff. So obviously we're a UX firm, and so we're talking about it particularly from the standpoint of UX. But there are a lot of people sitting around the table or the Zoom discussion who are having conversations about what features are going to be put forward and prioritized. How do you live in the tension, and how do you navigate when everybody can sort of come and make a compelling case from their particular seat, as to what needs to move forward? How do you work together and figure that out when at the end of the day you kind of have several viable options?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because you have a lot of different perspectives, and that's important. You need to have all those different perspectives. I think ultimately you have to have really solid data in place as much as you possibly can to be able to inform those decisions. And I think a lot of times there's compromise, and you don't hit stalemates and gridlock in those conversations. And there's definitely a lot of things to consider where there is some speculation that's involved, and that's okay. But as much as you can get that solid data from customers where it's been asked in a way that's not leading, it's been gathered in a way that's focused on past behavior, and past motivation that have been proved through that behavior, then you can really start to make those decisions based off of data rather than just simply opinions. So that's really where you want to get to.
One other thing I was wondering is, so you said that you go through and you kind of compare feature options head to head or whatever, and figure out how you're going to eliminate some. But in situations where you feel like there's a tie between a couple of really important features, like where would you go from there? How would you tackle that?
Yeah, so trying to break a tie with different features, I would put them through really that gamut of different considerations again, because you might be thinking of it from one point of view. In other words, like you're thinking of value to the customer. Well, this is really going to be valuable to the customer. So is this. So they kind of tie there. But then you might need to think of it in terms of, well, what's going to help sales, or what's going to help differentiate us from our competition, or what is the cost from a development perspective. And then finally thinking about where you're going, kind of bigger picture, longer term. That's another consideration. So there's all those little aspects that you can factor in, and is going to be very unlikely that, especially if you're looking at two things head to head, that they're going to be exact in every single category. So it's really kind of going through this whole list of different considerations that's going to help you arrive at those decisions. Some is going to just take, this is super valuable, this is not as valuable, and it's done. You understand what the priority is already, but some of it takes that further digging into those particular questions.
Kind of related to that and spinning off of it, one of the things you mentioned, the questions to ask was, will this feature break anything? And I think for a lot of folks, at least for me, you think about, hey, this will break something. That means it's a non-starter. So don't break it, obviously. Mm-hmm. But there could be scenarios where you kind of need to break something, and as it were, at that point, feature prioritization becomes something like taking your medicine. You have to kind of you have to swallow this pill in order to make it better. Have you seen any scenarios, or can you speak to anything like that when hey, this isn't necessarily something that's going to be fun or enjoyable, but it's but we need to do this in order to really optimize.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's definitely a big part of the just agile product process, right? There's going to be a lot of refactoring that has to happen kind of along the way to improve a product. So it might be something as simple as rearranging the navigation because now all of a sudden with this new feature doesn't make sense. Or it could be something that's, you know, database heavy. It's just not something that you would have thought about a couple of years ago because things have changed in terms of what you've learned from the market, what you've learned from your users. And now you need to introduce something that's vital to customers being able to do what they need to do, but it's going to require some big changes. So I think at that point, you need to really consider, is the cost of making these big changes worth it? Is it going to offer the value that people need? And is it going to offer the value to us as a business, either from the perspective of not losing customers or gaining new customers? It's just a lot of this. It's kind of that cost value analysis that you have to perform in those kind of situations. Because sometimes that lift is definitely worth it, and you need to do it. So otherwise, you're not going to go anywhere as a company.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember one of the things I remember talking about was the three things that everybody wants. We all want it. We want quality, and we want it cheap, and we want it fast. And you really can't. You can only grab two of them at a time. And so you can't really ever have all three. That doesn't exist. So navigating that tension is pretty tough.
That's right. Yeah, that the contractor's triangle is, you know, a name for it. But the amount of times that you see folks trying to cheat that triangle, it just doesn't work. It's kind of like cheating gravity. So yeah, you're gonna be able to pick two. It's not really either that or you're kind of just mediocre on all three. You're not really going to be able to optimize for three.
Well, we're getting close to the end. I don't know if anybody has any other questions or things.
Or comments, extension.
Actually, I do not have any question. Just sometimes just one thing came to my mind that sometimes in the user research, your customers want some specific features, but the company doesn't want to add it because of the time or because of the cost. And I don't know how you can encourage the company to have that feature in the products.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you're hearing that from your users, it is going to have to be balanced by the cost, and it's going to have to be balanced by, you know, what's going to happen if they don't have it. Because if you can make that case of if they don't have it, they're going to leave, or if they don't have this feature, then you know, we're going to be spending a lot of money on support or things like that. It's almost like if you're hearing that stuff from your users a lot, but the company is reluctant to introduce it, you really have to point out how that's going to cost them more in the end, or how they're going to lose out on an opportunity because they don't have that.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
Yeah, that's a great question.
And I don't know if I can. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Please go ahead. I don't know if I can ask question about the usability testing today or
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, actually, in one of my experience with the users, I had the usability testing with the first low fidelity wireframes, and I tried to ask them to move forward with the task and features that was possible to move forward at that time, and it made my user to be so anxious because told me that I want to go and do whatever I want to do. I don't want you to move forward and ask me to do these specific tasks. I want to know, is it correct that we do it, or I made a mistake? I have to give my user to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah, so it's you need to give them a task, absolutely, because really what you're trying to understand with a usability test is, are they able to complete this process? Are they able to, it's thinking about the goal that they have, and do these steps make sense for them to be able to reach that goal? So you want to have tasks, but you also don't want the tasks to be too maybe specific. Like you wouldn't want a task to be click this button, right? Because they need to explore it, and they need to, it should be a little bit more around, let's say an example of you're building some sort of like a profile or something like that. The goal should be more like build a profile and tell a little bit about yourself and things like that. So it should be more in terms of like what that end goal is, rather than, okay, click this circle and upload an image or something like that. But yeah, if they're complaining about the like the broader goal, then it might just need a little bit more explanation of what a usability test is trying to achieve.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions, anything UX related is welcome before we wrap up for the day?
I do not have. Thank you so much. It was so good.
Good. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks.
Of course. My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, Mark, any last remarks?
Yeah. So, of course, if you are looking for any sort of support from a UX perspective, or design audits, that's one of the big things that we've been doing recently for customers to help them understand kind of where their experience is right now and some of the next steps that they can take, then definitely reach out. Our email address is hello@trailmerge.com, and yeah,